What's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hold Space, where we hold space for important conversations. My name is Gareth Wheeler from Toronto FC. And as the Reds continue on south of the border, we eagerly await their return back home, back to BMO Field, back to normal. Right now, we're right in the middle of Asian Heritage Month. And part of that, we want to carry on the conversation about the game we love, heritage, and representation. We're going to do so today by having our wonderful panel. They're going to join me, share their own personal stories, experiences, and feelings on a number of different issues. And in doing so, in their own authentic voice, understanding that the Asian community itself is diverse, and there's no way the sentiment shared today will be shared by all within that community. And the conversations today may not cover all the various and complex issues that are really facing the community in real time today, but rather this is just part of a larger conversation that is taking place as we continue to evolve, grow, and learn more. So with that, without further ado, it's been a long time since I last saw Backup DJ. He's the party starter and finisher for all Toronto FC live events in and around BMO Field and across the city, really. Have you missed me more than I've missed you, Backup?
I watch our clips and our reels from the past 4 years, and it's like, oh man, I almost got a French bulldog because of you.
Oh, wow. Great to see you, pal, and we cannot get back to BMO Field soon enough. Miranda Anthusel joining us here today, anchor, broadcaster extraordinaire. You and your team have done a wonderful job covering everything to do with this pandemic. How are you doing? How are you feeling right now?
You know what? I just got my first dose of the vaccine, so I am feeling way more hopeful than I was a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, it's been a heavy year and 4 months. It's been very heavy, but I think the light is there at the end of the tunnel. I'm excited to move on to other stories and to get back to whatever this new normal is going to look like.
Well, thank you so much for bringing a voice to so many people that seem to not have had one over the course of the last year and change. And finally, it's Arnold Luong from the Chinese Soccer Association. He's also head coach of the select team and a big part of our greater soccer community in this great city. What's going on, Arnold? How are you?
It's been going pretty good. Just keeping up with full-time work and definitely keeping up with the latest coaching tactics so I can be well prepared as soon as we come out at the end of the tunnel, so we can get back to developing the next generation of soccer players in not only just in Toronto but also in Canada.
Excellent. Let's start at first base, or maybe the goal kick here, and we'll start with you, Backup DJ. What made you fall in love with the game of soccer?
You know what? It was the most common. It was the most common sport in the world. It's something that I grew up with, following and playing, and you know what? We didn't have the money to afford any other sports, and this was obviously the cheapest option. Hence why there's such a draw for this sport around the world.
Miranda, what's your affinity for the game of soccer?
Well, you know what? I really never had a choice. I was born in London, England. My dad was born there, my grandparents, great-grandparents, so on and so forth. So from the day I was born, I have been a Tottenham supporter through and through.
Wow.
My great-uncle in the late 30s was a goalkeeper for Spurs. So it's in my blood. My family has had season tickets for years and years. And so when my dad and mom and I moved here, my dad was so excited for Toronto FC when that started. So he's had season tickets to TFC since the beginning.
Arnold, what about you?
So when I was 5 years old, I remember kicking around the soccer ball with my uncle who was visiting from Hong Kong at the time. In Hong Kong, there was a huge following of the Premier League, so that's kind of how I fell in love with the game. So he was a huge Manchester United fan. So I remembered one of my great memories was sitting down with him on the couch, and we would just watch old highlight videos that he would bring over during his trip. So I watched highlights of David Beckham and Peter Schmeichel and just to really fall in love with how they played, and my first exposure to not only sports but also pro sports in general.
For me, there's a couple landmark happenings that have happened in world football, which has put Asian soccer on the map. It was hosting the World Cup in 2002, and South Korea went on a magical run and ended up coming fourth place in that tournament. The first time a World Cup was hosted on the Asian continent as well, and the first time that it was split up between two nations in Japan and South Korea as well. That was massive, as was 2011, and the Japanese women's side winning the Women's World Cup that year, upsetting the Americans. Those are just two landmark happenings. I just wonder for you, backup DJ, were those events very important for the Asian community in general, just in terms of representation on the biggest stage in football, which is the respective World Cups for men and women's?
Yeah, so you're actually, I go to all the World Cups, and my first one was in 2010 South Africa, and then I went on to Brazil, and then I ended up going to the Euro Cup, and then I went over to Russia. So I've been really immersed on the global stage in terms of as a spectator, and I was fortunate enough to DJ a couple parties in a couple of those countries. So with that said, to see what happened in 2002, and kind of see the involvement of that representation throughout, 10, 15 years later it's been crazy. I think having Korea, South Korea, and Japan host that tournament, the tournament, was huge for people to kind of just like watch, see each other, fan bases, come together, introduce each other. People from all over different countries come and fly into South Korea, come and fly into Japan, and experience that culture and kind of like grow to see how there's so many commonalities between the two fan bases, or 3 fan bases, or 10 fan bases, and everyone looks visibly different. So I think from that time on, I think it's grown, and I've never had a better time going to any of the World Cups. Let's just say that.
So for me, I feel like it's hard because I'm Chinese and I'm British and Canadian. So for me, football has always been, I've always supported England. But having said that, England only made it in the quarterfinals when South Korea did so well and came fourth in that World Cup. It was very inspiring for me to be able to see a team that also looked like my other side of the family. And I'm always about supporting the underdog as well. And some would say England's often the underdog in these massive tournaments, but it was great to see just representation on all levels, because it felt like multiple teams that I could then support and cheer on. So it was great to see that. And I think the more we see it, the less of a novelty it becomes. And, we wouldn't have to talk about it as much, but it's great that we're talking about it now, because it is important to know how we got here and how important it is to the Asian community to see that sort of representation on an international stage.
Absolutely. Well put. I can still picture that Ronaldinho goal against England that knocked them out of the tournament. But funny enough, that wasn't my biggest takeaway. It was just the spirit of the entire event, the fandom, the way that tournament seemed to take things to another level. Is that your biggest takeaway, Arnold? Where do you stand?
Well, I was only around 6 or 7 when the 2002 World Cup had occurred. So my biggest key takeaway was just seeing 23 guys that look just like me have so much success in arguably the highest stage of football. It was definitely really nice to see them have a tremendous amount of success and see a lot of nations and fans of various nations come together to share their spirit and love for the game of football and soccer in general.
In your respective space, what was the first encounter that made you personally critically aware of your own identity?
Growing up playing soccer, I knew that I stood out, and at that point, I kind of felt this sort of like pressure that I needed to, because I looked different, I needed to perform a different way. I needed to learn faster. I needed to get faster. I needed to be, better in whatever position that I was at, so that I could draw that attention away from me and not be, like Fran said, a novelty. And so I wanted to be normal in that space. And so, when as a DJ, I used to feel sometimes that kind of pressure that I put onto myself and try and make myself stand out in a way, but also make sure that it was always about my job that I was executing, whether it was on the pitch, in a position I was playing, or behind the decks and on stage, and making sure that at the end of the day, I was doing a great job.
It's a deep question. I remember my earliest memory of becoming aware of what I looked like and perhaps my background was really young. I was in senior kindergarten. We just moved from England and I was starting at a new school. I didn't know anyone. And I remember walking into the classroom, sitting down in a circle and seeing a boy, a Filipino boy. And I just gravitated towards him immediately because he looked like me. And there was this familiarity and we became best friends. And that's probably the first time that I can remember being aware of what I looked like. But honestly, up until 2020, I have not really critically thought about who I am, what I look like. It was really last year with the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes that I began to think about it, that I began seeing this disturbing trend of anti-Asian hate in the States. And then when I had to start reporting on it here in Toronto in the GTA, it made me pause and reflect and think about how some people could be viewing me, my Asian family, my Asian friends, my colleagues, and it was extremely disheartening. While last year's events and even this year and what's going on now, it's continuing on this anti-Asian hate, it's renewed my pride and strengthened my pride in being an Asian Canadian, because I think about everything all of the things that my family has done to get here and other families as well, the contributions to society, and also the conversations that are being had. People are actually speaking up and speaking out about what's going on, and including today, the conversation that we're having, that has given me hope.
What was that like for you, Miranda, just to be able to turn on that switch and start digging a little bit deeper?
It became a personal mission for me to make people aware of what was going on, because I started seeing things coming out of the United States, because I follow a lot of reporters and anchors out of the US, and there were Asian elders being attacked, being beaten up, being killed, and it just sickened me. And there was a part of me that thought, you know what, this can't happen in Canada. We're diverse, but we all get along here. The racism in Canada is not the same. It isn't the same, but it's not to say that there isn't racism in Canada and that we don't have work to do. Because I don't know if you saw the report, I believe it was just released last month, but Vancouver is considered it has the highest amount of anti-Asian hate crimes per capita in North America, not just Canada, but in North America. And so that's extremely disturbing. So we put together, my colleagues and I, an anti-Asian hate special to dive deeper into it, because doing 1 minute segments here and there every other day, that doesn't tell the whole story. So we really needed to dive deeper, explore what is the history of anti-Asian racism in Canada, microaggressions, covert, overt racism, and really dig deep into it. So while it was difficult, I felt a responsibility to bring it to a wider audience and to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, people aren't going to know that it's happening. How
did you feel about it while you're putting it together? Was it therapeutic in a way? I'm assuming it was emotional. It's very difficult to separate yourself from the story that you're covering. So what was that like?
It lighted a fire in me, to be honest, because I was so frustrated and angry and furious at what I was seeing here in Toronto. And thankfully, few and far between, but I don't know if you remember, there was an incident in Mississauga at the T&T grocery store where this man just went on a tirade screaming at an elderly employee of the store. This man was definitely a senior, and he stood his ground, was very polite, very graceful, and just took this tirade, but this man was screaming at him, "Go back to China." And all I could think about was, if my Chinese grandparents were still around, it broke my heart. It broke my heart. And so it made me want to do the best piece possible, objective, but the emotions were definitely there, but it lit a fire in me. And I was very passionate about telling that story and making sure that it was told and that people knew that was happening in our own backyard.
We all think that, I think, Miranda, you alluded to it, we're such a diverse country, we're such a diverse city. Backup DJ, you perform in front of thousands of people before TFC games. When you're out there playing, when you're looking out into the crowd, what are you seeing?
I got to say, as a DJ, it is an absolute gift to be a DJ in the city of Toronto, in downtown Canada. It's really great to be able to see not just different cultures and different people jamming out, to one party, but groups that are mixed. When I do DJ, when I do get the opportunity to DJ outside of Toronto, you don't see that. And I think that's something that we need to acknowledge, that we have in our city and in our country, that is a strength and that is a positive, and to use that as a model, for the rest of the cities and rest of the countries in the world, that we absolutely need to not treat each other the way that we have been treating each other, and use that as an example to really just push forward and figure out how to work together.
Miranda, obviously the entire notion of representation is changed greatly over recent years when it comes to the media. How important is representation? And perhaps you can speak to the way that things have shifted in such a positive way.
The word representation to me, I didn't want to be the token Asian reporter. I didn't want to be hired in the newsroom just to be, we ticked a box, and, we've met our quota. But then, as I've grown older and more mature and hopefully wiser, that's not representation. Proper representation to me is based on merit, and representation is important. And especially in a city like Toronto, which is so diverse, I think it is important that we have newsrooms that can reflect that, or have, multiple diverse voices. We're never going to get to a point, I don't think, where we can, equally represent every single ethnicity in the entire world, whether it's a newsroom or a sports team. That's just not possible. But to at least have a collection of diverse voices is so important, and I see it as a responsibility now. And in the newsrooms that I've been in Toronto, it's great. They really do. I think there's work to be done, but for the most part, there are diverse reporters, anchors, producers, editors, and I think management, that is slowly changing. And again, we still have work to do to get to that place, but it is, for the most part, I think, a great environment to be in, because I think we have responsibilities, for example, as Asian reporters and anchors, to tell the stories of the Asian community. I think when a story is told through a different lens about a community, you can miss certain things. And so our newsroom should be able to reflect the stories that we're telling in the field. Because oftentimes, if a story is being told by someone else through a different perspective or a different lens, we can get written out of that story. And it's not necessarily intentional, but it's just that they're not seeing the Asian stories from the Asian community. And that's really key.
Arnold, I want to come to you. How important is it to have the Chinese Soccer Association as an entity have that sort of representation in the overall soccer space in and around the Toronto community? Perhaps you could walk us through how and why it's so effective giving young Chinese players a voice in this market.
Back in 1989, when the Toronto Chinese Soccer Association was established, it was to help promote the game of football or soccer for the Chinese and East Asian community at the time. It really began as a recreational league for many, whether it's young or old adults in the Chinese community, to really come together, especially for the newcomers and immigrants that were coming from China or from Hong Kong to come to Toronto for a better life. It was really an opportunity for them to meet new people, meet people who look just like them, so they can all speak the same language that they're a little bit more comfortable with, just to really get them really integrated in the community, while also playing a great game of soccer. Having the association was really important, especially for those newcomers, as it's really important to bring newcomers, but also people who have grown up in Canada, to really have them come together as one community, and to really enjoy a great game of soccer. But also when the soccer camp for the younger children began, I believe in 2003, it was a great way to introduce young children to the game of soccer, which is universally accepted and beloved throughout the world, and to really bring a high level of diversity and to bring a high level of competitiveness when we're showcasing the Chinese Canadian soccer community.
Well said. This has been great. I want to finish on one very important question because, I firmly believe that the soccer community is welcoming. It can potentially be much more inclusive. However, I think it's the biggest fight that the world's game is facing right now is trying to stamp racism out of football. We see it in Major League Soccer. We see it across the world. Asian athletes among them who are being racially abused in the online space. Heung-min Son of Spurs, Miranda, he's been victim to some just vile abuse online. I want to ask all of you, what more can be done in your mind to make sure that it's inclusive for everyone and racism is taken out of the game as much as possible?
It starts with education. We need to teach our youth really how to talk to each other and how to treat each other, and acknowledge that we are all different. But those are all great things that we are different. That's obviously something that we need to start with. We need to continue that type of education, and we need to be able to, not only for ourselves, but we need to be able to speak up for, our brother, our sister, our cousin, our friend, our neighbor. And we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with a person who is victimized and who is attacked. And we need to let people know that it's not acceptable. We need to let people know that I'm here for you. If you want a shoulder to lean on, if you want a shoulder to stand beside you, if you want an ear, and we're there to, invite that conversation. And we need to be okay asking for help if we are victimized or if we are attacked, and we need to know that we are okay. And I think that brings up a really important point. Certain cultures are brought up to really just internalize things, and that I'm gonna come back to that question that you had asked in terms of identity. And this is something that I bottled up for years, and really only a few people know this story. But when I was young, I think it was grade 1 or 2, I had changed schools, and I grew up always only speaking English. And I had changed schools. And first day of school, I walked in, and I was actually sent out of class by that to go to a different classroom. To me, that classroom was English as a second language. I had not even said a word in that first classroom that I was sent to. And so I was a quiet guy when I was a kid. Surprise, surprise, but not. And I had walked in, and everyone looked, either like me or they weren't Caucasian. They weren't white. And so being quiet, I sat, whatever, opened my books and stuff like that. And when it was time for me to answer the question, I had spoken, I had verbalized for the first time there, and had commented about how well I had spoken, how well I had articulated the English, and she asked why I was there, and I go, I don't know, I was just sent. They're like, well, this is and I didn't know what he had said. I was that young, and so it got to the point where it obviously got to the principal's office, and I went back to the original class, and that was assigned. It was actually the first time I had experienced. I didn't know at the time because I was so young what I had experienced up until years. And I still really just bottled that instance. Kind of, I don't know, for me, I use it as fuel to speak up and say something to someone who is being attacked. Race, that whatever culture they may be, I use that instance because I wish at that time someone had spoken up for me. A lot has changed, but I think we still do have a lot of work to do. Had, been subject to certain comments, being called, obviously a racial slur, whether we're allowed to say, but for one instance, being called Mr. Miyagi repeatedly by an individual, and finally standing up for myself and saying that is not acceptable and that it's a dangerous game, that this person is playing. There are certain people with shorter fuses, and it's not going to end well for anybody in space. So, we want to get to that point, and that's why we be able to use our strength of words and encourage other people to stand up for themselves too in a positive way, and hopefully both parties are able to use that instance and turn into positive and kind of grow from that.
Making your voice heard, so important. Thank you for sharing that story back up. Miranda, what about you? How can the game become more inclusive? How can we take proper steps to stay up racism out of the game?
Well, I think it's about being proactive, actually taking concrete action and steps to show that soccer, football is an inclusive game and not just hoping people think that it is. So that could mean teams, clubs, leagues, etc., making sure that the underrepresented players are actually getting out there and are becoming more visible to the community and are sharing their stories, and their stories are being told. So I think the media plays a role here where we need to highlight these stories, keep them moving forward, and share them with an audience, because I think anytime that we are learning about something we don't know a lot about, we understand it more. When you understand it more, you can care about it more. And when you care about it more, that can create so many other opportunities for inclusivity. So it's not about special treatment for, say, the Asian community in soccer/football. It's not about ignoring the accomplishments of other amazing players, but it's just about creating a space to tell the stories of those who are underrepresented and to share their accomplishments and share their contributions to the beautiful game and let people know about it. Because if we don't talk about it, how is that kid going to know, what if they're growing up and their parents haven't had any role models saying, oh, look, there's this player in the Asian pro soccer leagues who's moving up the ranks, and this is someone you can look up to. If a kid doesn't have that role model or doesn't know about it and his friends don't know about it, it's about not missing an opportunity and making sure there's not a missed opportunity to encourage and inspire and motivate not only the younger generation, just people in general, to know that Asians can not only play pro soccer, but they are playing pro soccer. This is happening. So why aren't we talking about it? We need to talk about it more. And I think we need to give these stories a voice. If we keep doing that and sharing and talking about it, like I mentioned before, eventually talking about Asians playing pro soccer, it won't be a novelty, but we're not there yet.
Right. Exposure, proper storytelling, safe spaces. I love it. Arnold, what about you?
I think it's really important to start, especially at the early stages, when you're teaching a kid to kick their first soccer ball or to head their first ball. It's really important to have a positive learning environment for them, not to only grow as players but also as individuals. I'll be honest, even if there's in the future, if there might be a game where an opponent may be calling my kid a certain term, I will definitely stop the game right there and let the kid know it's not okay to say that, because we're working towards a progressive future where everyone can be accepted for who they are, regardless of their race, gender, culture, sexuality, religious beliefs. We're all here for our common love for the game of soccer and for football, and it's really important to teach the younger generation to be respectful and mindful for themselves, for their teammates, for their opponents, for their coaches, but also for everyone surrounding the community. So it's really important to start at the grassroots level and to really be a positive role model, as Miranda touched upon, to really showcase a lot of these great role models for these kids to look up to. But it's also our duty as coaches to also be that positive role model, because maybe one day one of my kids could eventually become a soccer coach for their own team. So it's really important to be a positive role model regardless of your role in the game of soccer.
Role models, so important. Holding people accountable. I love to hear that you put your foot down at that level, Arnold, and hopefully that trickles up through associations where that becomes the norm, where language like that is deemed unacceptable, and unfortunately the game cannot carry on as long as that exists. All three of you, this has been great today. Of course, it's Asian Heritage Month, but this is just only part of the conversation. It doesn't just happen 1 month a year. This should happen on a regular basis. All these things, having your voice, exposure, role models, you three all exemplify all of those traits and qualities. And I thank you for your time today. Thanks, guys. Backup DJ, by the way, Backup DJ is on his birth certificate. Tell him to prove it next time you see him. Good to see you, buddy. We'll see you at BMO Field sometime soon. Miranda will be seeing you on our television screen sometime soon. Excellent stuff today. Very much appreciate it. And I'll let Chris Armas know, Arnold, that his job may be on the line because you're coming for it. Toronto FC first team head coach Arnold Luong. I would love that. On behalf of Backup, Miranda, Arnold, I am Wheels, and this is being Hold Space. Keep it locked on Toronto FC social channels for more coverage as Asian Heritage Month rolls on.